Hello and welcome. With the latest outbreak of violence in Indian-administered Kashmir, what risk is there of the region being plunged into another period of prolonged instability? Does it also raise the chance of confrontation between nuclear-armed neighbours, India and Pakistan, over the disputed region? Kashmir's separatist movement erupted again after a teenager was allegedly killed by government forces last month. Since then, thousands of Kashmiris have poured into the streets of the capital city, Srinagar, demanding independence from India. The soldiers responded with deadly force, killing 17 people in the last 4 weeks, many of them teenagers. The region had been relatively calm since an armed rebellion began in 1989 against Indian rule. Kashmiris say the latest outburst was provoked by the brutality of Indian security forces. But New Delhi has blamed Pakistan-based groups for the unrest. Kashmir has been a flashpoint between India and Pakistan since the partition of the subcontinent in 1947. India controls the southern and central parts of Kashmir, around 50% of the territory. Pakistan has control over 1/3 of the region in the northwest, and the unofficial border is called the Line of Control. The rest of Kashmir, a chunk in the northeast, is held by China. Now today we ask, how can such a complex dispute be resolved, and what is a realistic future for Kashmir? Call in with your questions and comments, and we welcome your SMSs and emails onto the show as well. We're joined from New York by Kashmiri journalist and author Basharat Peer, who grew up in Srinagar, the summer capital of Indian Kashmir. He has written about his experiences in the book Curfewed Night, one Kashmiri journalist's frontline account of life, love and war in his homeland. We also have with us Ambassador Casey Singh, a former Indian diplomat who served in key posts throughout the Ministry of External Affairs. The ambassador was also Deputy Secretary to the President of India. He's currently a fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies in New Delhi. Gentlemen, I welcome you both to the show. Basharat Peer, if I could start with you and ask from your perspective, what has really raised the tensions this time around? What, after a relatively calm sort of period in Kashmir, has caused the tensions to reach this kind of breaking point?
Riz, I think it's a reaction to the over-securitization of Kashmir. You know, we saw in the last few years that the level of the insurgency had waned. But in 2008, we saw a major series of protests, which were just triggered by a land row and then morphed into a calls for independence. But I think, you know, the larger reasons behind the events are the fact that, you know, the insurgency waned partly because Pakistan did withdraw some support to the militancy, and that India's counterinsurgency campaign for the last 20 years was largely a military success. But that campaign also was accompanied by a wide-scale human rights abuse. So, and the military deployment in Kashmir remains...
I'm interrupting you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you because I noticed this time it's much more of a younger crowd that's clashing with the security forces. What has prompted this kind of very young movement to rebel?
Riz, I was just back in Kashmir interviewing a lot of these youngsters, and the fact is, it is this backdrop of what happened in the last 20 years. They remember it. They remember things that happened when they were like 10 and 12. And it is that collective memory and this idea that nothing has moved, and they feel oppressed. The fact is, a lot of them said when they throw stones at the Indian forces, they feel this release. They feel they're not helpless anymore. So it is really a reaction to that over-securitization, and also that these youngsters have been formed by the last 20 years of conflict. That is what they know. Those are their definitive political memories.
Okay. Let me bring in Ambassador Casey Singh. So glad to have you on the show as well, sir. And let me get your perspective on what you see as the cause of the recent tensions that are pushing things to such an edge here in Kashmir now.
Well, yes, I agree with your other interlocutor that basically there's been a mishandling within the valley. We had very successful elections there, extremely good turnout, and perhaps it is the same youth. I don't think it's a memory that the youth have of anything in the past, because really the uprising in the valley starts in about 1988, 1989, when many of these kids wouldn't have been born. But what has really happened is that they are feeling isolated, alienated, and the young chief minister who's gone in there, Omar Abdullah, he's not been able to handle it. You have to provide them jobs. You have to make them feel wanted. There is also a competition between another young leader of a family which ruled just before this, belonging to the PDP party. Then I think there is a degree of copycatting from West Asia, the intifada tactics of throwing stones, putting the youngsters in front, and then really compelling the security forces to hit back. And that is where it's been ham-handed, because you don't have to fire back. You should not be using those tactics. And a Central Reserve Police force really has been unprepared for this kind of a protest, which involves throwing of stones and not either civil protest or something more radical like terrorism.
Ambassador, let me ask you a suggestion for if you were to have some say in how the Indian forces in Kashmir were to handle the current situation against the tactics you've just described. How would you suggest they move forward, sir, so that things don't escalate any further?
The Indian experience has been, including in my state in Punjab, we had militancy in the 80s. Ultimately, the solution is never through security agency. It has to be a combination of a political force with the security agency. I personally feel that Omar Abdullah, the chief minister, has to get his act together, or someone else has to step in, perhaps even his father, who let the son become the chief minister because he thought, let there be a generational change. It has to be that, and the police force has to use other methods like rubber bullets or other kinds of methods of crowd control, or simply not getting into a confrontation. And also, I think where the political methodology is required is, if there is a killing, we've seen that the chief minister has not been going out and meeting the families or meeting those affected. You have to pull the youngsters out from this mode and involve them in what they feel is a constructive exercise in creating jobs and giving them employment. This has become a vicious cycle.
Okay.
There is incitement from across the border, but I would not say that that is the cause of it. There's certainly across the border, they would be happy to exploit it. But essentially, I think it's local mishandling.
All right, Basharat Pir, let me ask you about your view on what seems to be obviously a point of concern for many Kashmiris, and that is the rules, how the rules are a little different perhaps in Kashmir with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which essentially gives the Indian forces a large degree of immunity when it comes to firing on the Kashmiris who are protesting and so on. To what degree is that something that has caused a lot of the tensions to rise recently?
Riz, that's what I meant to say when I was talking about over-securitization, about it's not that, I disagree with Ambassador saying about these people not remembering anything. There are things that have happened to almost every other family, and a lot of these youngsters, things happened, something they saw a few years back. And the question is, there's one thing that India can certainly do to make things better. It's not just a question of law and order and using rubber bullets instead of like live ammunition. It's a question of moving it forward politically. But yes, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act has come to symbolize the worst when the Kashmiris think about India. And it is a much hated law which has been, there was even a committee by the Indian Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, which recommended that it should be repealed. And this law is basically violating all civil rights. Okay. So it is a crucial thing that needs to be done, but it hasn't been. The Indian military has resisted it, but it's sure.
I want to ask Ambassador Singh also about the clampdown on the media, because that's been something that's been of concern to a lot of people, Ambassador. We had an email, if I could put this to you. It came in from a viewer by the name of Nasir Mahmood, who wrote in saying, if India believes in the true spirit of democracy, then why has it clamped down on the media in the last few weeks? Why doesn't India go for a democratic solution of the Kashmir issue according to UN resolutions? UN resolutions I'll get to in a second, but in terms of clamping down on the media, doesn't that really betray India's tradition of a strong free media and freedom of expression and its strong democratic standing in the world as the world's biggest democracy?
It may be something which was done locally by the state government. As far as the national media is concerned, we've been seeing all the footage on the national television channels. Some of the top anchors have been there. Barkhadat has been there. I don't think there's any clampdown as far as national media's coverage is concerned. But in any local area, if there is irresponsible reporting, if there is a fanning of the fire, I think to douse the flames, maybe for a limited period, it may have been a local decision which has been taken. But at the national level, we are seeing all the footage. There's nothing. Just one point about the Armed Forces Special Act. This time, when the military was asked by the state government to step in, the defense minister, Mr. Antony, was very particular. He said the military shall not go inside the town. It will only be on the main street. It should not go into the side lanes. It will only do a flag march. And he was very particular. He says you have to handle it through the Central Reserve Police Force. And a number of Central Reserve Police Force officers who have been caught over exercising their power beyond their normal authority have been prosecuted. There are cases which have been registered, etc. But Army has been very chary of getting directly involved, and they just went in for a short period, did a flag march, and they've come back.
Okay. We're going to take a very short break here. I have many more questions for both of you. We're going to return with more of that. India also wants all of Kashmir, so does Pakistan, but for their part, most Kashmiris are said to want independence. So is there really a solution? We'll look at that idea when we return. Welcome back. Violence has fled again in Indian Kashmir, leaving a trail of death and devastation. We're examining possible solutions to what is considered one of the world's most intractable problems. Discussing this, I have with me journalist and author Basharat Peer, who grew up in Indian-controlled Kashmir and now writes extensively about the conflict in the disputed region. He's in New York. And from New Delhi, we have Ambassador K.C. Singh, who served in key posts throughout the Ministry of External Affairs and as Secretary to the President of India. Now, we had a Twitter comment that came in from through a tweet from the UK, from Vijay Vikram. Basharat Peer, I'd like you to answer this. It says, it's not about what India can do, it is that Pakistan must stop supporting the Kashmiri separatist movement. Now, I know the ambassador said that it's unlikely that Pakistan has had a major hand in what's happening right now in Kashmir in any big way, even though it may want to exploit some of that. But how do you regard India's claim generally that perhaps it's the fighters in Kashmir are professional jihadis, that they come from other countries, you know, the Chechens, Afghans, Pakistanis and so on, and they're sort of hijacking the Kashmiri movement?
Whereas that has happened, you know, Pakistan did back and fund the the rebels in Kashmir, and that's a story that has happened. But what we are looking that's an old story. In the last few years, we have seen this waning of militancy, and to a degree, Pakistan has cut back. The recent allegations that the current protest in Kashmir, that the boys coming out on the streets with stones, no, that's not about Pakistan. That's about Kashmir and Kashmiris reacting to political oppression. They live in a situation which looks like a military occupation. When Ambassador Singh was saying copycatting West Asian tactics, because there are echoes of that particular West Asian reality too, and it is a response that people are having to local realities. It's not because, you know, somebody in Pakistan makes a phone call.
Well, all right, let's get a call in from Farouk in London, who's been on the line patiently. Farouk, go ahead.
Hi, Riz, Farouk. I just want to say quickly that Mr. Singh's law facts are absolutely wrong, because I think he's looking at the Indian perspective, which is fair enough. But quickly, two questions. Why India doesn't give us the right of self-determination, which he promised the United Nations again and again by Mr. Nehru and other people in India? And second thing is, if Kashmiris are so patriotic, what 700 Indian soldiers are doing in Kashmir? I mean, is there any answer to that? Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Ambassador, basically our viewers asking about the right to self-determination and saying that if Kashmiris are patriotic, why does it take Indian soldiers to have to control them?
Absolutely. The 1948 plebiscite resolution had many components to it, and one of the components was that Pakistan will withdraw all its troops and India will scale down the troops, and after that, after a due period, there would be a plebiscite. But I think those conditions were never met. And now, of course, between 1948 and 2010, we've had many other agreements. We had a Tashkent agreement in 1966, and we had a similar agreement in 1972 when India had 90,000 Pakistani soldiers. We returned them, and it is generally accepted that Prime Minister Bhutto, he gave a commitment to Mrs. Gandhi that basically the solution will be a status quo solution. He'll go back and convince his people, and that is what the final turnout would be. But I think since then, of course, things have gone in a different direction. Now, as far as the troops in Kashmir are concerned, it is really a sovereign decision for India to deploy their military wherever they feel it is necessary, and the troops are not there in the cities. The troops are largely controlling the line of control. You know what happened in Kargil in 1999 when we had an incursion from Pakistan. So you cannot withdraw your troops as long as you're not sure that the other side is not going to create any disturbance or come across the line of control or not really accept the sanctity of the line of control. There has been a scale back of the army in the valley, and there would be a further scale back depending on the law and order condition.
Okay, Ambassador, sorry to interrupt you there, but we had an email, if I may put this to you, that came from New Delhi in India from Sabiq Rashid. And Sabiq Rashid wrote in saying, the whole world is responsible for Kashmir, not just India and Pakistan. Yet the UN is not doing much. If India withdraws, Kashmir will have the right of self-determination and the issue will be resolved. Now, I was wondering, India's generally resisted third-party intervention. Isn't it time perhaps to rethink that policy? Couldn't the UN play some sort of valuable role?
Indian experience with the UN was very unhappy in 1948. If you remember, it was India which took the case to the United Nations, not Pakistan, because the raiders had come from across the line of control, and we went there seeking, in fact, a UN resolution against Pakistan, that they were intervening in a state which at that stage had not acceded either to India or to Pakistan. And in fact, at that stage, only when the accession took place, the Indian forces went in. And that was, an agreement that the Maharaja then had, which when he was making up his mind whether he wanted to join India or Pakistan. So the attempt to change the status quo was really made from the Pakistani side. Now at the moment, I think the time for changing of boundaries is gone, and this is what was recognized by President Musharraf. And that's why President Musharraf's talks with first the previous government and now the present Prime Minister reached a stage in 2006 where they were willing to look at solutions which said it is not about changing boundaries, it is about making boundaries irrelevant, which is making trade, commerce, contact across the line of control possible and easy, and therefore, in a sense, enabling the people to deal with each other and making the boundary irrelevant.
Okay, let me put a question that came by email to you, Basharat Peer. This one is from Mushtaq Ahmed Kafre, who says, both Pakistan and India do not want Kashmir to be resolved because they have interests in keeping the conflict going. Now, a lot of people believe that Kashmir is obviously a convenient rallying point for many politicians, and by keeping that conflict alive, of course, it justifies a lot of actions one way or the other on both sides of the border. How do you regard that?
Well, there is certainly strong interests on both sides of the border to keep Kashmir alive. I mean, in the sort of on the Indian side, I mean, there's a whole economy of the military industrial complex is there with such huge deployments. It's a question of that there's a lot of money being poured into Kashmir. There are secret funds for counterinsurgency and stuff like that, and a lot of people are making money. And similarly, on the Pakistani side, it provides the same function of expanding the military budget. And then when things don't work on any other issue, they can always use Kashmir as a rallying cry. But despite that, there has been, as Ambassador Singh said, I mean, one thing I have to agree with him was there was this back-channel talks between India and Pakistan, and there was a degree of moment wherein they had agreed on a certain non-paper that, maybe largely autonomous Kashmir with soft borders, and where at some point India and Pakistan will move their troops to the borders. I don't agree with Ambassador Singh's earlier contention that there are no troops in the cities, and there are hundreds of military camps and paramilitary camps in Kashmir. I mean, you can drive for a minute and pass a soldier. That's not a situation. But yes, there are quarters in India and Pakistan which are actually now thinking seriously about moving forward on Kashmir.
All right, let me get one call in because we've actually got a caller from Kashmir. Good to hear from you, Mohammed. What would you like to say?
I just wanted to point out to your esteemed guest. I want to point out to your esteemed guest that I would very much love him to point out any street in Kashmir where there is no army. Will India stop telling lies to the world and treat this as a problem of a nation, not a land dispute in their backyard? Let him start from Gazibund up to Udi. There is not even a single street without armored cars which are blocking those. People are not even allowed to go for their parties. Army is just outside.
Okay, Mohammed, let me put that. Thank you for calling us from Kashmir with a viewpoint directly from there. Ambassador, I have just 1 minute really, sir. It's not a lot of time, but if you could give me a perspective on Mohammed's view that the army is in every street. And I wonder if the Kashmiri voice has largely been left out of the whole equation much of the time here.
Well, firstly, without direct evidence, let me say that I don't think army is out in the streets, because this I have from high-level sources here, that the defense minister stepped in and said there's no way. I think he's confusing the Central Reserve Police Force, which is a civilian force, from the army. It's CRPF which is out, which is a paramilitary force, and it's not the army. And secondly, I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Yeah, really, just a quick thought, sir. 30 seconds. Has the Kashmiri voice been left out of this?
See, the Kashmiri voice, when there was such a successful election, where more than 50% of the people in the most troubled parts of Kashmir voted, it aroused great hope. And that is why this young chief minister who went in there, it was expected that he'll be able to tap into the youth and really bring them into the national mainstream. So the failure to do that is really a political failure. It's got nothing to do with any major intervention from across the border or any military intervention from the Indian side.
Ambassador, sadly, I have to stop you there and thank you very much for joining us, along with you, Basharat Peer. Thank you. Obviously, a story we should keep following, and we hope to revisit soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Thank you. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook. Be sure to check out upcoming topics and watch previous programs as well. You can also post your questions for our guests. On the next show, are Somalia's Al-Shabaab fighters becoming more of a regional threat? For the first time, the group struck outside their own country, launching attacks in Uganda. African leaders meet this week at the African Union Summit. And beyond more troops being sent to repel them, what else can be done? Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the teams in London and Washington, D.C., we'll see you next time.